Hi, this is Rev Ed with today's Back Porch Devotional from Genesis chapter 17, verses 9 through 14. And God said to Abraham, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you must be circumcised. Every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring, both he who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Here God gives Abraham the sign of his covenant with him, that Abraham and all his male offspring throughout the generations should be circumcised. And this was the commandment for the Jewish people. It was a sign that they belonged to God's family. Circumcision may have had health benefits, but that wasn't the primary reason for it. The primary reason was an act of dedication. It was to demonstrate devotion to God, and it was also to illustrate that the children of God's people are included in God's people. And so this procedure was performed on male children when they were 8 days old, as a sign that they were members of the covenant community. When anyone did convert to Judaism, they too were required to be circumcised. It became the sign of the covenant. The Presbyterian Church has always held that in the same way we baptize infants, because there is a correlation between baptism as a sign of the new covenant and circumcision as a sign of the old covenant. Paul writes in the second chapter of Colossians, beginning at the 11th verse, "In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. And you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross." Now, Paul makes the important point here that this is a circumcision made without hands, that it's not the physical act that matters. It is the act of faith, the trusting in the work of God through Christ that matters. So in the same way, even though children were circumcised and born into the family of Israel, they might have fallen away from the things that God called them to do as a member of that family. In the same way, just because a child is baptized does not mean that they will always walk in the way that God has called them to do. But we do claim that the children of the covenant family are set apart and consecrated to God. They are baptized as a sign of our trust in God's grace, which comes to us before we even know his name. Baptism is a seal of an inward event. And so any child who is baptized has to grow into that faith. It's like a deposit that is made in the bank in that child's name. The child has that deposit, but he must claim it through his own faith as he matures and understands who Jesus is and what he has done for him. So baptism has now become the sign of the new covenant, where circumcision was the sign of the old covenant. And circumcision was done, we should note this, in the organ of procreation, as a sign that the seed of Abraham, the Messiah, would come from his heritage, would be a direct descendant at some point. It is a sign that God uses this fleshly human body to carry out his work. And it's a reminder to us that Jesus came in the flesh. So baptism corresponds to circumcision, but neither has anything to do with faith in God if that faith is not made real when we put our trust in Jesus Christ. So if you've been baptized, celebrate your baptism. Remember that you are baptized and that God claimed you before the foundation of the world, and live into that baptism as God's promises have been poured out on you, a child of the covenant. God's blessings be upon you this day.